I just think positive energy and enthusiasm go a long way. Understanding that we have a young team and we're trying to get them to improve. And even if we didn't get the job done this year, there is sustained belief that we're going to get this going in the right direction. And it's not just a lost year. There are a lot of good habits developed toward the end of this year. That's important. We talk about that every day. That's part of the reason why our guys are staying so well engaged. They care about doing things the right way.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and as always you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, the same on Instagram and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We're here for number 6 in the season in review series. We've already covered the worst 5 teams, the Brooklyn Nets, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Phoenix Suns, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Sacramento Kings. Even though they weren't one of the first worst 5 teams, they are in there because they had that pick number 5. Now we are on to talking about the Orlando Magic, the owners of the 6th pick in the NBA draft. So we're going to talk about all things Magic. So
let's get to it.
All right, let's get to it indeed. We'll start with, as we do in all their shows, a bit of an overview of the team. And I did already mention it, but the Magic do have this 6th pick in this 2017 NBA draft that's coming up. That's not the only pick they have. They have 4 picks inside the top 35. They have 2 first-round selections, pick 6 and pick 25, which came from the Raptors in the Serge Ibaka trade. They also have pick 33 and pick 35. So one of those is their own second-round pick, and the other one of those is the Los Angeles Lakers' second-round pick, which if the Lakers hadn't have found themselves in the top 3 this year, they wouldn't have got. They would have instead got a unprotected first-round pick in 2019. So while that is a good pick, pick 33, it's obviously not as good as an unprotected 2019 first. So the Magic should be a little bit disappointed that A, they moved down in the first round, and that they also now don't get that Lakers pick. Not a great situation. Well, they're not in a great situation just in general, but that's not an ideal way when they could have had a real boost to what they were being able to do by being able to get that extra first-round pick in a couple of seasons' time. Let's look at their free agents. It's not that big of a deal in terms of who is coming off the books this year. We've got Jody Meeks, who's an unrestricted free agent. We've got Jeff Green, who is also an unrestricted free agent. There is CJ Watson, whose deal is non-guaranteed. There is Steven Zimmerman, whose deal is non-guaranteed. There's Patrizio Garino, who's a restricted free agent, who was, I think the most impactful thing he did for the Magic this season was being photographed in front of that infamous whiteboard with all the free agency and trade targets on it. So he barely played for this team. He started off the season with the Mavericks, and Damjan Rudej is a restricted free agent. I have absolutely no idea how Rudej was even in the NBA this year, let alone a player that played rotational minutes at times. So that's their list of free agents. It's not, if they lost all of them, it wouldn't matter. And honestly, it's better if they lose guys like Jeff Green and Rudej, to be honest, because they're not providing anything positive for this team. Not that any of the others really did a huge amount for them. Jody Meeks barely played with that foot injury, but he provided a little bit of spark, I guess, at the end of the season. But all in all, the players that they're losing, there's no real big decisions or big concerns that they've got in terms of upcoming free agency. The Magic finished the season at 29-53. A lot of people were expecting the Magic to make the playoffs. I was not one of those. People. They were enamored by the moves that they made in free agency, especially the defensive moves. It didn't work. They were horrible. Still, they were 29-53, but they actually outperformed their expected win-loss, their point differential, by 5 wins. So in reality, they're a 24-win team that got the ball to bounce their way a little bit to get to 29. So that is a disheartening prospect, I guess, for Magic people. I talked about them bringing in these guys for their defense, Serge Ibaka, Bismack Biyombo, a horrible allocation of resources and use of talent that was already on the team, which we'll get into a little bit later. We knew their offense was going to struggle, and that was the case. They were the 29th team in offensive rating. Horrendous. But there was the talk, okay, well, that'll be balanced out because they'll be a top 10 defense. Maybe they'll be a top 5. Shit, could they be a top 3 defense in the NBA? That was the talk from very smart people in the NBA that they thought that could be the case. I didn't fully subscribe to that, mainly because I don't think Bismack Biyombo is as good as what people think he is. But that was the thinking. That was a 22nd team in defensive rating, which is horrendous for a team that misspent so much money on that side of the ball. So it wasn't great. They didn't get to the line at all. 27th in free throw rate. They were 29th in three-point percentage. The team hit just 33% of their threes for the season. We knew this was a problem. No three-point shooters, no offense, nothing, no priority on that area at all. And it clearly bit them in the ass. They couldn't hit any shots. 29th in effective field goal percentage as well. So overall, if you're a Magic fan, it was disappointing. But the end of the season should give you a degree of hope, because we saw Frank Vogel start to work some things out, and I was very critical of Frank through the majority of this season, and I think rightly so with the criticism that I leveled his way. A lot of the criticism needed to go towards the front office as well, and that's fine. Rob Hennigan is out. John Hammond, the Bucks GM, is in. We can talk about Hammond making some good selections, and he did. Malcolm Brogdon, Thon McCurr, Giannis Antetokounmpo, obviously brilliant picks. But we also can't give Hammond a complete 100% pass in Milwaukee. His signing of big money to all these centers, Miles Plumlee, John Henson, along with Greg Monroe, and then drafting Thon McCurr, they weren't the smartest decisions. But overall, Hammond's ability in the draft, it gets him this job. We knew that he was on the way out in Milwaukee. They're bringing in, they've got that assistant GM there, Justin Vanek, I believe his name is, but he might not get the job. To me, this all smells of a big Kidd power play, as it always is with Jason Kidd. You know that I'm not big on Jason Kidd as a person or as an NBA executive or coach. But Hammond was on the way out, and he's a great get for the Magic. They also got Jeff Weltham, I believe his name is, from the Toronto Raptors to be their president of basketball operations. So he works alongside Hammond now. And a weird part of the deal that the Magic did have to give up a second round pick. Actually, maybe these Magic picks I had here, they were before that deal for Hammond for Weltham to come across from the Raptors. So maybe they still don't have that pick. I need to check that up, because they did have to give up a second round draft choice to Toronto in that deal. And they also are unable to trade with the Raptors for a year now, which is something that I guess you don't really think about it. But the fact that the Raptors lost their assistant GM, he went to the Magic, and now those teams can't trade with each other, which I guess it does make sense. So now I'm looking at the official NBA draft order here, and I don't see that pick going from Orlando to Toronto next in this draft in 2017. So it must be going in the coming season. So that is obviously things that are changing, and that's going in the right direction for this team to get some new blood in there, because that front office made some horrendous decisions. Now, I got completely sidetracked on my point. My point was that Magic fans, you should have a little hope of what we saw at the end of the season. We saw Lord Alfred Payton really come into his own and start showing that, you know what, this guy can be a starting point guard, and when the faith is invested in him, he can become okay. Aaron Gordon moved to his best position and played well. Nikola Vucevic, just solid as always, doing what he does. Terrence Ross, up and down. Evan Fournier started to look much better in the second half of the season when he was played in lineups that made more sense. So there is a little bit of hope there. Can they add someone with pick 6? That's going to be an interesting thing. Now, I was thinking about this today, about the way the draft's going to go down. I think, and especially when I was thinking about talking about the team like the Mavericks at pick 9, I reckon we're going to see 5 point guards go in the top 8 picks. I reckon we're going to see 4 of them go in the top 5 picks. And I don't think the Magic will pick one at pick 6. I think they're going to have their choice between Jason Tatum and Jonathan Isaac at that selection. I think they'll probably end up taking Tatum. They're also going to have Malik Monk there as an option, with maybe for a team that finished 29th in three-point percentage, maybe adding Malik Monk, who was a 40% three-point shooter at Kentucky, helps. He's obviously very undersized and has defensive concerns as well, but they need offense. They need someone who can create shots. So maybe putting him in there and playing him alongside Fournier and Payton, moving Terrence Ross to a 6th-man role works. You could say the same with Tatum. Putting him in there alongside Fournier and moving Ross back to that 6th-man role also could work. So they have a couple of options, and I think it's going to be Tatum, Isaac, or Monk that they select at that pick. I don't think that they'll be reaching for a guy like Ntilikina at that spot. I think Fox will be gone, and I also think that Dennis Smith Jr. will be gone, who is another player who they could have considered at that spot, but that's just my own personal opinion on that situation. Let's look at the offensive ratings of this team, that the highest offensive rating, the highest guy in terms of individual offensive rating was Marcus George Hunt. He only played 48 minutes, so I think we discount that a little bit. Serge Ibaka had the best offensive rating on this team, which says something. The fact that, A, he's not on the team anymore, and he was brought in to be a defensive guy. He had the highest offensive rating. Lord Alfred Payton was second. Aaron Gordon third. Jody Meeks and Evan Fournier tied for fourth. So we're seeing big parts of their core there. Payton, Gordon, and Fournier. And guys like Payton and Gordon, who aren't known for their offensive acumen, that's not really the big part of their game. Being the guys who did drive that offense. Granted, the offense was horrible, but they were being the best offensive players on this team. In terms of best defensive rating, I think people would be shocked to see Nikola Vucevic there at number one. His defense was much improved this season. You can talk about him, and I think a lot of that comes because he's a big white center. The fact that he's a bad defender. He's not a great defender. He's not a horrible defender. He's not Enes Kanter, which is obviously the example I throw out there quite a bit. But he led the team in defensive rating. Steven Zimmerman came in second, limited minutes. Bismack Biyombo third, Serge Ibaka fourth, and Terrence Ross fifth in defensive rating for this team. And I thought it was quite interesting to see Vooch come in there as the number one player in defensive rating. We talked about some of these other teams, and you see 7 players shot over 40% on corner threes, 8 players, 6 players. The Magic had 1 player shoot over 40% on corner threes, and that is an abysmal total. That player was Jody Meeks, so a player who missed the majority of the season, and you couldn't even put that 40% shooting to any good use through the majority of the 2016-17 campaign. They had 7 guys on their roster shoot under 30% on corner threes. Horrendous. And this is the thing, that you see this stuff happen in the offseason. You go, you know what? They are going to struggle to shoot threes. They are going to struggle to generate offense. This is going to be a real problem. And then it turns out to be a real problem. And that is why Rob Hennigan doesn't have a job anymore, because this stuff was as plain as dog's balls. Really, it was so simple to see that everyone knew it was a concern, and then it played out in either exactly that same manner or worse. And that is why you end up losing a job like Hannigan did, even though he did have quite a lot of time in this job to try and do something. That was just a horrendous offseason for the Orlando Magic. Aaron Gordon shot 69% at the rim.
Giggity.
Great. The problem is that he played so much of the season out at the 3, so getting to the rim was obviously a little bit harder when playing out in the perimeter, but he only shot 32% on these 3 to 10 foot jumpers, which is a really bad amount. And between 16 feet and 3, so long twos, 32%. And that's the problem with this poor offense that they had, is that he was taking a lot of those shots instead of being in close and being able to catch oops and play in closer to the basket. And that was a big problem with him, with Hannigan, and with Vogel. And that contributed to a lot of the issues that the Magic had during the season. Let's have a look at the leaders in advanced stats for this team. Vucevic had a highest PR at 19.1. True shooting, it was a tie between Ibaka at 57 and Jody Meeks at 57. So that's not a great true shooting. Our true shooting average is about 44 to 45%, so they're above average. But most teams you look at, they'll have a guy at 60, 61, 62. To have the leaders at 57, again, just illustrates the offensive problems that this team had. Vooch led the team in usage percentage at 24.8, while Lord Alfred Payton led in win shares at 4.4, and win shares per 48 went to Ibaka and Marcus George Hunt, who were just a little bit over average, and the average number is 0.1. Ibaka was at 0.108, and George Hunt at 0.107. Offensive box score plus minus, Evan Fournier, the only guy who really was able to create offense for himself. Defensive box score plus minus, Vucevic at 2.4, and he had the highest total box score plus minus at 1.1, and Vorp was a tie between Vucevic and Payton at 1.7. I think that was pretty self-evident. I don't think you would have had too much trouble guessing that, given the way that those two guys played for this team, especially down the stretch. If you want to look at lineups for this team, their most used lineup, and this should give the team encouragement. It was Payton, Fournier, Ross, Gordon, Vucevic. The lineup that makes sense. A couple of three-point shooters in Fournier and Ross, Payton running things, Gordon at the 4, and Vucevic at center. They played 410 minutes together. And I know what this also illustrates to me. We talked about the Sixers, we talked about the Nets, we talked about the Kings having no lineups over 200 minutes and only 2 over 100 minutes. This lineup here only played together after the trade deadline and played 410 minutes. That's how easy it is to get lineups decent minutes. And that, a lot of my criticisms of the Kings and Jaeger and Atkinson and the Nets was just not enabling these players to get any chemistry together by just not getting your best players to actually play minutes together to keep you competitive. If you can get 410 minutes from your best lineup post All-Star break in your 25 games, surely you can get more than 2 lineups to have over 100 minutes and at least one to have over 200 minutes. That lineup was a positive 1.4, so it's not massive, but it's also not a negative. So that's a good sign for the Magic. They had 7 lineups over 100 minutes, and only 2 of those were positive, including that most used one. The other lineup that was a positive, Fournier, Gordon, Payton, Ross. So those same 4 guys, but substituting in Bismack Biyombo for Nikola Vucevic, and that was a +6, so a little bit better there. And that's totally fine to have. I'm really critical of what Biyombo can do, but having him in there with a little bit more shooting around is fine in limited minutes. And him playing his role, which is really key in so many things in the NBA, don't stretch players outside what they can actually do, which is what they thought they could do with Biyombo, and they tried to do, and it didn't work. And then when they realized it and went back to what he could do, it was fine. And that's exactly what we see here. Their most used 4-man lineup, Fournier, Gordon, Payton, and Vucevic, was a negative 1.4, but their best 4-man lineup consisted of Gordon, Payton, Ross, and Vucevic. So you see that Ross, despite his statistics and a fantasy point of view being quite up and down, he did have a positive impact on this team. That 4-man lineup was a 3.9. Their top 9 3-man lineups in terms of minutes played were all negative. That's not ideal. Their best 3-man, Ross, again, Payton, and Vooch, at a plus 3.8. Their third best 3-man lineup, weirdly, was Gordon, Ibaka, and Vucevic. That weird lineup with Gordon at the 3 and one they started for big chunks of the season. That was a positive 1.3. So that was a little bit surprising to me to see that, to see Gordon have such a positive lineup with those other 2 guys. Let's look at, before we move on to talking about the players individually, stash players. They don't really have anybody. The only guy that I can see here is Tyler Harvey, who was a 2015 second rounder. He played in the D-League the season before. Last year, he played for Torino in Italy. I don't think there's a huge amount to look at with him. 11.5 points, 2 boards, 2 assists, and a steal. He hit 2 threes a game at 37%. He had a PER of 12, a usage of 22, and a true shooting of just 51. Maybe they can bring him over, and he fills that role like a Garino, George Hunt, Meeks, CJ Watson sort of a thing. But I don't really think there's too much to get interested in with Tyler Harvey. I wouldn't be having any sort of level of excitement from him as we move forward for this team into the coming seasons. All right, let's get into talking about these players now. The first one we'll start off with is the best fantasy player on this team, and that's Nikola Vucevic. He was always going to be in line for a reduction in his performance just because of the addition of Ibaka and Biyombo, and that's exactly what we saw. He had been a top 30 player for the 2 previous seasons. He ended this season as the 50th ranked player, so obviously a little bit of a decline, but he did bump it up post All-Star from 60th to 42nd, and that's because we started to see more minutes out of him. Now, I was quite critical. You're well aware of that, of Vogel limiting what Vooch can do, playing him off the bench, playing him limited minutes behind Biyombo. In fact, he played only 29 minutes a game this season, Vucevic, as opposed to the 31 he played last year, 34 the year before, or 32 before that. He still put up good numbers. He averaged double-digit rebounding, a big increase in his per 36 rebound rate. He saw his block rate hold steady and got a block a game in those 3 or 2 less minutes that he played. But what he did do was he saw his scoring drop. He saw his field goal attempts per 36 drop by over 1 per game, and his scoring went from 21 down to 18 per 36 minutes as he took less shots, and he was also less efficient. And some of that's due to the fact that he started taking threes. His per 36 three-point attempts went from 0.2 to 1.3, and he only hit them at 30%. So he started taking them, and that can be helpful, but he didn't hit them with any sort of level of consistency. In fact, his true shooting was an abysmal 49.7, which is horrendous for a big man, and he saw that overall field goal percentage drop from 51 down to 47, in some part due to the fact that he started taking those threes and not hitting them. But we look at his overall line, 14.5 points, 0.3 triples, 10.5 boards, 3 assists, a steal, and a block per game. And I think you talk about his defensive issues, The fact that he did average a steal and a block, I think it is all right. Now, obviously, the blocking is not great. He did take a big step forward in that with Skiles last season for all the criticisms that people and I levelled at Scott Skiles. He did get Vucevic playing a much higher level of defence, and it held with Vogel. So that's an impressive thing to me, the fact that he did have that blocker game for 2 consecutive years, got the steal rate up. Now, I don't know what they're going to do with Vooch heading into the season. Do they look to trade him? He's not a massive difference maker. He's definitely not a negative, though. It all comes down to his value. Does he play 28 minutes a game, or does he play 32 minutes a game? If he plays 28 minutes a game, then he's this guy that's a 50 to 65 sort of a player. As we saw, 14 and a half and 10 and a half. Really good numbers. A steal and a block. Good numbers. Does he get that field goal percentage back up to 49 or 50%? That would help him, maybe jump to the 40s. But if he goes and plays 32 minutes a game, and post All-Star, in the last 2 months of the season, he played 30 minutes a game. That's he was pretty good in that area. He was the 38th ranked player in overall value, not my head-to-head ranks. 38th in 30 minutes, averaging 16 and a half and 11, with 1.1 steals and 1 block. And still shot inefficiently at 49% true shooting. He did hit 35% of his threes there, though, but he saw more field goal attempts. He scored more. He took more shots. He got more rebounds. Does that 30 to 31 minute Vucevic be the guy that we see next season? I think it will be. And I'm okay. And I don't think he jumps back into a top 30 role, but I think that he comes back and can be a top 50 guy with a high degree of consistency and reliability. I think that they see that they can do that. I think they see that featuring Biyombo in a big role doesn't work. And I think they'd love to get rid of Biyombo's contract, to be honest. And I think that you'll see those 30. Now, you won't get 35 out of Vooch, but I think you'll get 30 to 31. And he was also playing. He came back from some injury at the end of the season. We thought, maybe he's not going to play again this year. Maybe he had a sore Achilles, but he came back and played. And looked fine and played big minutes. So I'm pretty interested in him again for next season. I reckon we get at least one more top 50 season out of Vooch, maybe 2. Obviously, if there's a trade involved, things can alter. But I'm okay with him. I think that we'll see second half Vooch rather than the dicking around in the first half that we saw from Vogel and from the Magic in general. Now, the Magic were an interesting team just in terms of on-off numbers. All of their main contributors had such massive on-off numbers, whereas the bench was horrendous. So Vooch had a 6.1 in his on-off, meaning the team was 6.1 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court versus with him on the bench. And talk about the other guys. Lord Alfred Payton, a big positive. Evan Fournier, a big positive. Terrence Ross, a big positive. Aaron Gordon, a massive positive. And then there was only one other positive player on the team, and that was Jody Meeks. Everyone else, significant negatives. And that's why that big lineup that played all those minutes was a key to them playing well, because the best players played the most minutes and they started to look better, and it reflected in everything that they did because that bench was just so horrendous, and that continued, and they need to really boost that up. So whatever happens with that 6th pick, that's going to help, because it's either they're going to start them or they're going to be a part of that bench unit, which hopefully helps to improve that differential between the good players and the bad players on the team. Let's talk Payton. You know that I'm a big Lord Alfred Payton fan, have been since he started, and I think he's been horribly misused by both Skiles and Vogel. He played 29 minutes a game this year, averaged 13 points. He actually hit half a 3 a game, only at 27%, but hit half a 3. Almost 5 boards, 6.5 assists, a steal, half a block, which is pretty good for a point guard, 47% on his field goal attempts and 69% from the line.
Giggity!
And a true shooting of 52%, which is higher than Nikola Vucevic, and that's a problem for Vucevic. And Payton still can get better in his efficiency, but I thought he was pretty impressive this season. Post All-Star break, 30 minutes a game, 13, 7, and 8. Yes, he averaged 7 assists in the 25 games after the All-Star break. A steal a game, 0.6 blocks, and 51% from the field. And this is the Lord Alfred Payton that we saw in college. He can't shoot. We know that. He's not a good shooter. There's no argument about that. We know that. But he takes the shots that he can make. He can attack the rim and finish. And he was a guy that was a 50% shooter in his time in college. And also 50% field goal percentage, not a shooter, 50% field goal percentage because he finished at the rim so well. And he was able to do that and take his field goal percentage from his first 2 years where he was at 43 and 44. He went to 47 this year. And as I said, a 50% or 51% guy post All-Star, which is huge. He took his fantasy ranking head-to-head from 123rd post or pre-All-Star to 51st post. It's a big jump. And I thought he was impressive, and we saw March is always really kind to Lord Alfred Payton, dropping triple doubles left, right, and center. And I think that the way that he played, the way that Vogel started to have more confidence in him, should give you more confidence in him from a fantasy point of view moving forward. That we can expect at least a level of this production from him as we move forward. He shot 61% at the rim. That's fantastic. Mid-range jumpers, 10 to 16 feet, just 36%. But still, he wasn't horrendous in these areas. 3 to 10 feet, 43%. Really did improve. Now, he struggles from 3, obviously, at 27%. But he does what he needs to do. And that is sometimes an underrated thing in terms of players. And we talk about how he's not great in that mid-range. He barely took any shots there. 42% of his shots were at the rim. It's a good, and he only took 16% of his shots from 3. He only took 11% of his shots on 20% on long twos. So he did what he needed to do. And I'm big on Alfred Payton. He's not ever going to become an all-star, I don't think. He's probably never going to become a top 10 point guard. But from a fantasy point of view, if he gets the 30, 31, 32 minutes, he's going to be a really reliable contributor who can be a 14, 5.5, 7 guy with 1.5 steals and over half a block and high field goal percentage. And if he continues that trend of his free throw percentage up at 74% post All-Star, that's another huge bump to his value. So he was tremendous. He actually led this team in on-off at a positive 9.9 points per 100 possessions, which is huge. And it really drives home the fact that it was absolutely batshit insane, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous to bench him and to play DJ Augustin, who was a team worst, negative 12.7. That is horrendous. And to play CJ Watson, who was a negative 4 over Payton. Not only were those two guys no part of anybody's future, but they were bad. They were really, really bad. And Payton, while he wasn't great the entire time, he was better than them at every stage of the season. And that was something that Vogel gets that criticism. Criticism for the front office is fine. Bringing Ibaka in, Biyombo, forcing Gordon to the wrong position. That's all front office stuff. But this bullshit with Payton was strictly on Vogel. And you can understand, okay, there was someone else there who was really pushing them, but Augustin was terrible. And there was no need for it, and that really derailed what Payton could do. And nearly every time that he got benched, he started playing better than, or he did play better than Augustin anyway, and he saw himself get more minutes. But it was a complete mismanagement and misuse of Payton did. Not to the degree of Skiles, but Vogel worked it out. And that's where he gets praise. That's where he gets kudos for going, you know what, I made a mistake here. This is actually what's going to happen. Let's push forward with that. And that's why I have this level of confidence in Alfred as we move forward, because I did enjoy, especially what we saw from him at that second half of the season. Really, some strong fantasy numbers, points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, field goal percentage, and free throw percentage, really becoming either positives or minuscule negatives. Actually, if I have a look at what they were in terms of actually pure fan, he was just a small minus in points, a positive rebounder, assist man, dead even on steals and blocks, a positive field goal percentage guy, and a marginal negative in free throw. So the only category he really sucked at was his three-pointers, where he had a negative 1.1 standard score. And all his others were within... The only other negatives he had, which were points and free throws, were less than negative 0.4. So a real positive post All-Star in many different categories. So I'm okay with Alfred. I think he starts. I don't think that they pick a point guard at pick 6 because, I think the only point guard from that top 15 that's around at that point is going to be Ntilikina, and I don't think they'll pick him there. I think they'll be happy to take Payton and grab one of those wings in Tatum, Isaac, or Monk with that selection. That's the way I think they go. So I think the Payton... anything can change. I don't know what Hammond will do, but I think he'll be pretty okay with having Payton there, and I think that he's going to be fairly solidly into that position as we move forward. It's probably enough of talking about Lord Alfred. Let's talk about one of my other boyfriends, and that's Evan Fournier. Fournier coming off a breakout season the year before. I'm probably the number one member of the Evan Fournier fan club. Back from his time in Denver, I thought he should have got more minutes back in Denver, and eventually it came true, and I couldn't have expected what we saw from him last season. I am a big fan of him, but I never expected to see what we saw. This season, it was a marginal step backwards for Fournier. He was the 103rd ranked player for the season in his 33 minutes, but he still averaged 17 points, 2 threes, 3 boards, 3 assists, and a steal a game at 44 and 81 as his percentages, 36 from 3 and a true shooting of 54. Really solid numbers. Nothing spectacular. Now, I thought that he had a real chance to average 20 points a game this season because of the lack of any sort of offense on this team, and he obviously didn't get to that. He wasn't able to average that, but he did take his scoring average up from 15 to 17, a 2-point increase. He saw his 3-pointers stay the same, so he was taking more shots, clearly an extra 2 shots a game, and they were 2-pointers. He saw his steal rate stay steady. He saw his assist rate rise. So there were definitely some positives, but I think the big thing that did drop down his fantasy rank was his field goal percentage, which went from 46 down to 44, from being a guy that was a high efficiency volume scorer to a guy that becomes a negative efficiency guy, and not a huge one. I said 56% true shooting is still pretty good, but not as good as 59 that he had the year before. So his efficiency did drop a little bit there, and he went from 40% on threes down to 36, which again was a fair indicator of where that value really dropped from Fournier. But everything else was pretty good. He saw a 3.5% spike in his usage rate. Again, something that was quite predictable on this team with the absence of Victor Oladipo, and he stepped into that role pretty well. Now, he did have some struggles earlier on. He did have some injuries which bothered him for pretty big chunks of time at the end of the year with that sore right foot. But again, he was able to come back and put together a strong post-All-Star break run where he averaged 17.5 points, 2 assists, which is a little bit low, but still a steal a game, still shot pretty decently, 37% from 3, and hit almost 2.5 threes per game in that time frame. His ranking didn't change too much pre and post, but I think I'm more impressed the fact that it didn't drop post, given he was battling that injury. He went from 102 to 105, and the team was 4.5 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court. Again, not really too much of a surprise. They could draft a guy like Tatum. They could draft Isaac. They could draft Monk. I don't think that really impacts Fournier all that much for this season. We can talk about rookies all the time, and they do get overvalued quite a bit in fantasy. That's a pretty common thing for me to look back on, where people will obviously, or Yahoo will have 9, 10 rookies projected in the top 120 picks, and in the end, 3 of them end up there. And you'll see people get overly excited. We saw that with Buddy Hield this year. Buddy Hield's going to come out there and play 35 minutes and score 20 points. It just doesn't happen, especially for guys, say it's a Malik Monk, who people might think, he's going to come in and challenge Fournier. I think expecting Monk to come in and play 32 minutes and score 20 points and be the focal point of the offense is just an unrealistic expectation. So I think Fournier is pretty safe for at least this season and probably next season, in that I think he's got quite a wide range, 60 to 100. If his field goal percentage jumps back up with some more weapons around him, with hopefully the development of Gordon, the addition of Ross for a full season, hopefully another scorer with that rookie bunch with Peyton developing, maybe he can take his field goals from 44 to 46, and that enables his scoring to go from 17 to 18.5, and his threes to go from 2 to 2.5. You really help bumping up that stuff and taking a little bit of the load off him, so he's not taking as many terrible contested shots, which is something that we saw really happen for Kemba Walker in Charlotte when he got someone who had a modicum of offensive talent next to him in Nick Batum. He didn't have to take the 3-on-1 contested end of shot clock jumpers, which saw his field goal percentage at 40%. He was able to bump it back up, and maybe Fournier, if Ross becomes a threat, if a guy like Monk comes in, if Gordon develops to another stage, then Fournier won't be the guy who's handling all of the offensive responsibility, and I think that will help his rank, and I think he's going to be fairly solid in that 60 to 100 range as a decent volume scorer on solid efficiency who provides some steals, some assists, and some threes, and that's something that I don't think that you can be overly critical of. Terrence Ross. Let's look at what he did in his time in Orlando, because I think looking at his overall numbers skews it, because he played limited time in Toronto, obviously. When he came to Orlando as part of that Serge Ibaka deal, he played 31 minutes a night. He averaged 12.5 points and almost 2 threes a game. 3 boards, 1.8 assists, 1.5 steals, half a block, an impressive block number there for him as well, and shot 43 from the field, 85 from the line, and 34 from 3 for a 54% true shooting. So there's obviously some concerns there just with the inefficiency. We saw him have big games and then go completely missing. His consistency is a real problem, and that's a concern for fantasy. But he was the 89th ranked player in that time since arriving in Orlando, in large part due to the fact that he hit 2 threes a game, and that's something that I do bang on about quite a bit, is finding 2 threes a game from people all the time. That wasn't his biggest contribution, though. His biggest fantasy contribution was the fact that he averaged 1.5 steals. So he's not just a 3-point specialist like a Nick Young. I was going to call him Nick P, like a Nick Young. He's not that sort of a guy like an Alan Crabb. He gave you 2 threes a game, but he was available on waiver wires on and off throughout the end of the season. He only finished the season with a 50% ownership rate in Yahoo. Now, some of that's to do with teams being eliminated and not necessarily adding him, but he was a guy that I looked to add pretty much everywhere once that trade went down, and he finished the season with a solid top 100 run, fueled by steals and threes. Now, that's not for everybody. I talk about it all the time, is that rankings between 60 and 120, whatever it is, they're so close, it all depends on exactly what you need. So if you didn't need threes or steals, then what was the point? He didn't give you anything else. He hurt your field goals, doesn't rebound or get assists. His scoring was blur, but he still helped in those categories in a decently significant way. The team was 5.5 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court versus with him off it. So that's obviously an improvement there for Teza as well. Put up some good numbers. Now he's 25 years of age. He's just starting to come into his prime. He's on a really value contract. I'm expecting some pretty decent stuff from him. Now, his advanced numbers weren't brilliant, but he does provide some decent perimeter defense, and he just needs to get that shooting back going. Only 54% true shooting while he was in Orlando. That does need to come up, but he's just not going to help you in other areas. Rebounds, assists, don't expect too much out of that, but the defensive stuff from Terrence Ross, that was impressive, and I would expect, you would think, 2 threes, 1.5 steals a game is not an unrealistic expectation. He might lose a role at some point during the season from the addition of Monk, Tatum, Isaac, that trio, which I do think will come in. It could be anyone that comes in, of course. They're the 3 guys that I'm really looking at here for Orlando. So he could lose a little bit of playing time there. But I think in a 28 to 30 minute a game role, he has value more as a steady 14-team league guy, but someone that you can definitely take towards the end of a 12-teamer if you're looking for statistical contributions in single or specific categories. But his upside to me is quite limited from a fantasy point of view, and he's never going to have that, I'm taking him at 120 and he's going to become the 50th ranked player. I just don't see that for Ross. He's just going to be, I'll just give you consistent 90 ranked seasons and do that, and that can be fine, but it all does depend on how your team sort of looks. Let's talk about the next bloke, and that is Aaron Gordon, who we were pretty excited about heading into the season, and it's safe to say that he let us down, the team let us down, and he wasn't anywhere near where we needed him to be. He was a guy that I thought had serious top 60 upside, top 70 upside, and I took him around the 70s in quite a few drafts, and it was horrendous for the majority of the season. There's no denying that. We look at his overall season numbers. He played just 29 minutes a game, 12.5 points, but he did hit a 3. He had 5 boards, 2 assists, 0.8 steals, and half a block on 46 and 72% shooting, 29% from 3 for a true shooting of 53. Those numbers are not great. We look at how he did from his pre and post All-Star break splits, and that gives you a really good indication of the changes here. Pre-All-Star, he was the 236th ranked player in head-to-head leagues. Post, 79th. What changed? Oh, he moved from the 3 to the 4. I was a little bit probably bullish on him in the preseason, expecting him to be able to keep his rebounding up at the 3, for him to be able to come in as a weak side shot blocker, and that stuff didn't happen. His block rate, his rebounding, his field goal percentage took a significant hit playing on the perimeter, which I probably underestimated how big of a hit that would take. But then when he moved back to the 4, we saw some pretty good numbers from him. It was horrendous moves. It was just a bunch of horrendous moves. Bringing Biyombo in, and look, bringing Biyombo in or bringing Ibaka in, one of those moves would have been okay. Because you could have made the decision, okay, you bring Biyombo in and you start Gordon and Vooch, and then Biyombo comes in, fine. You bring just Ibaka in, okay, maybe you start Ibaka and Vucevic, and then you bring Gordon in off the bench and Ibaka moves to the 5 and he gets his 30 minutes. He plays 5-6 minutes as a 3 and he plays the rest as a 4. But that didn't happen. They brought both of them in. But this is still doesn't absolve Frank Vogel of poor decision making. Because yes, he was put in a bad position with Biyombo, Ibaka and Vucevic both there. But when positions or opportunities opened up at the 4, Vogel refused to play Gordon there. He wouldn't do it. He would play him at the 4 never. And that was a real black mark on what Vogel did. He would play Damjan Rudej there, which nobody ever needs to see. He would play Jeff Green there, which of course nobody ever needs to see playing anywhere on an NBA court. They just refused to put, and I understand they were trying to work him into a 3, but it was common sense. When everyone can see it, it was common sense. Now he guards the perimeter very well, and there's no problem with that. But on offense, he struggled, and even his defensive numbers struggled. And the team played better with him at the 4. And it's not, to me, that's not rocket science. They were 9.3 points better off with him on the court versus with him off, so another huge positive. So those 5 starters, Vooch, Payton, Fournier, Ross, and Gordon, had on-offs of 6.1, 9.9, 4.4, 5.5, and 9.3. Really significant positive numbers. And a lot of that did come based on that second half of the year. Now, we look at what Gordon did in that second half when he was able to play the 4. He got more minutes. He played 31 minutes a night. He averaged 16 points as opposed from his whole season numbers of 12.7. He hit .83, so got more confidence back in his shot. 6 rebounds, higher rebounding. Well, still just the 1.7 assists, but saw his blocks go from half to 0.7. Still massive room for him to improve there. And he got 0.9 steals. And most importantly, shot 50%. 45% before, 50% after. Huge improvement. That saw him jump from 240th to 79th or whatever it was in those rankings. Still only shot 27% from 3 and took 3 attempts per game. But he was able to get more attempts in closer and get that field goal percentage up and look a better player in his natural position. It was just as common sense is. Now, what do we expect from Gordon here as he heads into his 4th season, another time where players take a big leap forward? Now, Gordon's taken a pretty sizable leap forward in his 3 seasons. He went from 5 points in his first year in 17 minutes to 9 points in 24 minutes to 13 points in 29 minutes. And as we saw at the end of the year, 17 points in 31 minutes after Ibaka was gone. So yeah, he's got that offensive growth coming, taking more shots. His field goal attempts per 36 went from 9 to 11 to 13.5. More offensive responsibility. His efficiency hasn't really changed, 52, 54, 53 from his true shooting, but taking more shots, being a bigger part of things. Does he play more than 29 minutes a game? I would be stunned if he didn't. Can he be a top 50 player? Maybe. Although, in the last 9 games of the season, so the last month of the year, he was the 24th ranked player, where he averaged 19.5 and 8, hit 1.6 threes and had 1.7 steals on true shooting of 60%. That's tantalizing. And he does have this ability to be a 1-1 guy who can average 16 points and 8 rebounds in his new position. So I think people will be scared of Gordon next season. I think they'll be down on him. And that is a common reaction in fantasy circles. I'm not drafting this guy. He killed me. Burn me. Never again. Do not draft list. And that's why that you lose from doing that sort of shit. It's simple. You got to have, you have to be like an NFL cornerback. You got to have no memory. You have to be able to go, well, forget this shit. How does his value project at where I'm getting him? And he is going to be a significant slide candidate that you won't have to pick at pick 60 or 70, but he's got every opportunity if you get him at 100 to easily be a top 60 player, a top 70 player. And again, those last 9 games, extraordinarily small sample size, but a top 25 guy at 20 points a game. Unrealistic to think that, but he's got a sliver of a chance of jumping into the top 50, whereas a guy like Terrence Ross, I think, has 0 chance of slipping into the top 50. And Gordon, for big chunks of the season, was outside the top 200, and dropping him at any time in January was fine because you put up with bullshit for November, December, and all of January and most of February. And holding on for someone who's got that potential for so long is a tough ask. But as soon as Ibaka went, it was a no-brainer to add, and that's exactly how it went out, and that was what we were hoping we saw from him to begin the season. So positive signs for Aaron Gordon, as there were for many of these Magic players once things started to make sense. Funny that. Jody Meeks only played 36 games for the Magic this season. He was the 195th ranked player in his 21 minutes, 9 points, 1.6 threes, 2 boards, 1.3 assists, 0.9 steals, and shot a putrid 40% from the field, but shot a brilliant 41% from three for a true shooting of 57%. One of the things, again, to highlight here with Meeks is the fact that he only played 21 minutes a game, but 1.6 threes. Just another one of those guys. I need threes. Oh, where can I get him? Let's add Jody Meeks for the day. Let's stream him in. They've got a back-to-back. Hey, let's get 4 threes out of Meeks for 2 games. That's a possibility. Now, he is a free agent coming up, so maybe he doesn't return to this team, but just another example of a player who can hit those threes and maybe prevent you from overvaluing three-pointers 100% while drafting. The team was 1.9 points per 100 possessions better off with Meeks versus him on the bench. So that's obviously a win, but he was never a staple guy for fantasy leagues, especially with that injury which kept him out for so much of the season. And he did just play the 36 games for the year, and 12 of those post All-Star break, where, again, not much change for him. 18 minutes, 1.7 threes. He is a guy that hits threes, hits them at a high rate. He's a 3-point percentage guy if you're playing with that in your league. But at the age that Meeks is, he's 29 at the moment. You're going to be 30 next year. He's a player that I don't really see much hope for him. I don't know whether they bring him back. I would probably be a little bit doubtful whether the Magic do. I guess it depends on the sort of deal that he's looking for. He was on a $6.5 million deal, which I guess is not horrible. If he comes back for that sort of price, I could see them doing that. Much better than them playing the DJ Augustine, CJ Watson backcourt together, or Peyton and Augustine. Having Meeks in there alongside Peyton is a decent combination, and one that makes a lot more sense than some of the stuff that we saw from the Magic this season. So he was far from a disaster after coming across in that trade with the Pistons for a very late second round pick. Bismack Biyombo, he was the 255th ranked player this season. He played 22 minutes a game and averaged 6 points and 7 boards. Gives you no assists, 0.9, no steals, 0.3, and 1.1 blocks, 53% from the field and 53% from the line, which is obviously horrible. Now, you can look at that field goal percentage and go, that's pretty good, but he takes 4 attempts a game, so it just has absolutely no impact on that category at all. In fact, he almost took as many free throw attempts, 53% on 3 attempts per game, which was such a significant negative. And you look at the combined, or the actual Z scores of those, field goal percentage, 53% at 4 attempts. He was a 0.4 positive. So a marginal positive. 53% on his free throws at 2.9 attempts, a negative 1.9. Really, if you had him on your roster, anything over -2, over -2.5 is venturing into punt territory, and he was getting a significant amount of attempts and shooting them at a significantly poor level. A lot of people were into drafting Bismack Biyombo. I don't really know why. They were excited for him. Again, I don't know why. And he was shit us. It's as simple as that. He didn't do anything that was impressive. He actually saw his numbers regress from Toronto, where he played the same amount of minutes, but his ranking went from 176th to 252nd. He scored more points, yes, but he got less rebounds. He blocked less shots. He shot worse from both the field and from the line, and so his true shooting tumbled from 59 down to 54% for a guy that's honestly taking shots on putbacks and offensive rebounds and dump-offs. It's unfathomable that you could have just a 53% field goal percentage, considering where those shots are coming from. He was just bad. It's as simple as that. He took way too many shots from between 3 to 10 feet, 32%. He just should never be doing that. He also took somehow 3% of his shots from 16 feet and out, which is crazily unfathomable. He just needs to take... He just needed to not take any sort of jump shot. But here we are. Now, we saw Vogel make the mistake of trying to start him and play him big minutes as a starter, and it didn't work because he's not good. He's a role player, a 20-minute-a-night role player, if that, 18-minute-a-night role player, and we saw Vogel realize that. And again, kudos to Vogel for trying it, fine, and then realizing, you know what, this doesn't work. And going back to 30 of Vucevic and 18 of Biyombo, or 15 or 16 of Biyombo, lineups that made more sense. I have zero faith for him moving forward. He just offers nothing. He offers rebounds. Like that's it. He offers rebounds and subpar field goal percentage for a guy like him, and okay blocks. He averaged 0.1 blocks per game more than Vucevic. And that's for a guy. He played 6 minutes less, but when your reputation or your value here as a defender, that's what you need to be doing more of. He was not great. He finished the season, he was pre-All-Star 183rd and post at 244th. He's a deeper league guy only, and I really don't see too much changing for him for next season. If they go back and start him again, I'll be befuddled. He's just a very expensive backup center role player, and that's just where he is. So 20-team leagues, expect a guy around the 200s, fine. He'll just continually give you that number, the really good rebounding, 7 rebounds or so, a block a game, and that's about it. I just wouldn't expect too much more out of Bismack Biyombo. The team was 3.5 points worse off with him on the court versus when he was on the bench as well. So that's obviously not a huge positive for Bismack. Jeff Green.
My name is Jeff.
Kevin Carlson says, people got high off Biyombo's performance against the Cavs in last year. Yeah, absolutely they did. And so did Rob Hennigan. And literally it was like 2 games. He had that one game where he grabbed like 25 rebounds. And there were just a plethora of rusty trombones going around. Oh, Biyombo, look at this. He set the record. He's going to be this difference maker. It was insanity to me that people got so hyped up over Biyombo from that. This is what it was. He had one game of those 20-plus rebounds. And he had another game where he blocked LeBron at the rim. That might have even been the same game, but that was it. Oh, Biyombo, Eastern Conference Finals. He blocked LeBron at the rim. Let's get him. 20 rebounds. This guy's a stud. Yeah, no. And especially on a team that had limited offensive threats as it was. He was just never going to work out. So don't expect a bounce back, because this is who he is. This is not a down season as he adjusted to a new team or Vogel misused him. This is just who he is. This is just where we are with Bismack. Jeff Green, one of the worst players that does go around in the NBA. He played 69 games.
Giggity.
There's been a lot of quagmire today. 22 minutes a game, 9 points. He hit almost a 3 a game, 3 boards, 1 assist, 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks, and shot 39% from the field, 86% from the line for a true shooting of 51%. The signing of Green made no sense. 1 year, $15 million deal. You're not building anything for the future. He's not helping you in the long term. It just was a ridiculous move. And then Vogel also misused Green. He played him over Gordon. When there was openings to play minutes at the 4, Green would get them. And that's fine. You can bring him in. The front office paid him the $15 million. It was a stupid deal, ridiculous. But then Vogel should have said, well, that's cool, but what the hell is he doing to benefit us? How is he helping us at all? And the answer is, he's not. The team was 3.7 points per 100 possessions worse off, which is not a big difference, but when you consider Aaron Gordon at 9.3, it is a big difference there. And fantasy-wise, he was horrendous for the majority of this season, or not the majority, for all of this season. He was ranked very comfortably outside the top 250 for overall value. At the 260th, his head-to-head ranks were equally as bad. In fact, in my 8-2 head-to-head ranks, he was the 308th ranked player. That's how bad he was for the season. Where does Jeff Green go next season? I don't care. Wherever he goes, he's going to be playing less than 20 minutes a game. He's going to be a 15-minute guy, hopefully. And shit, even if he gets 26, 27 minutes a night, he just isn't good. And he's just not good enough to provide any sort of fantasy value in those sort of minutes. He's just not good. We just need to accept that he is not good anymore. Poor true shooting, below average PER, horrible box score plus minus numbers. Just nothing that really stood out about him as having a positive season for this team. And it was a bad contract, but at least it's only 1 year, and he is gone, and we'll see exactly where he ends up. And I imagine he would end up in a situation where he'll be the 10th man, 9th man, that sort of thing. It's just the Jeff Green myth is toasted. It's cooked. He's not good. Speaking of not good, DJ Augustine, he was bad for the majority of this season. I already talked about it, that he was a negative 12.7 in his on-off numbers and somehow started games over Lord Alfred Payton and played minutes over Lord Alfred Payton. He ended up with 78 games played and 20 minutes a game, 8 points, 1.2 threes, 2.7 assists, half a steal, 38% from the field, 35 from three, and 81 from the line for a true shooting of 52%. He is still signed for multiple seasons at like $7 million a year. I think 2 more years, which is not great at all, considering just how absolutely horrible he was for the majority of the for the entirety of this season. Bad defensively, played out of position at times at shooting guard as well, which didn't help him or help the team. Augustine had some moments in Chicago. He played well in Detroit. We saw all of that, but he's done now. He's finished. He's toast. He's a backup, and teams, and I don't think any teams would fall for this Vogel trick of deciding that he is going to start over our young point guard, who is objectively better in nearly every single area, apart from 3-point shooting. So Augustine's a guy that we do watch though for fantasy, because if for some reason he's pushed into a 30-minute a game role, the assists will come. You'll get 6 assists. You'll get 2-point-something threes. You'll get 15, 16 points. You'll get value. You'll get high free throw percentage. He's a very, very good free throw shooter. And you'll get that on decent attempts that can influence that category. And that's what we do talk about this, or I talk about this a lot on this podcast, is when the opportunity does come for him, if he's forced into action, the numbers will be there. The problem is he's not good enough to force that thing to happen often enough. It's going to be an emergency situation. So if Payton was to go down, I'd grab Augustine immediately. No problem. Again, I don't think they'll be picking a point guard, so I don't think there's any worry there. But if Payton gets hurt, I grab Augustine and go, well, if they're going to play him 30 minutes a night, I'm going to benefit. I'm going to get 5 or 6 assists. I'm going to get 2 threes a game. I'm going to get use out of that. But he's not good enough to demand that sort of a situation, to demand that sort of a role, and eventually it falls apart. And that's sort of where we are again. Horribly misused in the wrong way. He was overvalued and played at times when he shouldn't have, and his role is going to be as a backup. Does struggle in that, but from our fantasy point of view, he can have a degree of value. Now, last year it wasn't great. He was the 292nd ranked player for the season, which is obviously horrendous. And post All-Star, he was the 376th. That is amazingly bad that he could be that way. But the value of assists, if he is forced into a longer term role with, if Payton happens to be out, yeah, could have value, but do not get anywhere near excited with DJ Augustine. And the guy's 29 years of age already, so I expect a significant drop-off for him to come, if it hasn't already, which it probably has. Speaking of significant drop-offs, CJ Watson, another player who was a point guard on this team, played a lot of shooting guard. He had 62 games at 16 minutes, 4.5 points, 2 assists, half a three, shot just 39% from the field. In fact, they had so many guys shoot under 40%. Green, Augustine, Watson, Hazonia, Rudej, Zimmerman. No wonder they were 29th in effective field goal percentage. So we had CJ Watson, with his numbers there. Again, really good from the free throw line, doesn't get there all that often, and shot just 31% from three. And he was another player that was used incorrectly through the majority of this season. They were 4 points better off with him on the bench versus him on the court, and his ranking was just comfortably outside the top 250 for majority of the year. In fact, he was 322nd for the full season, which is obviously not good, and by not good I mean it was bad. He's 32 years of age. Do they bring him back for next season? He's got a non-guaranteed deal, as I mentioned earlier. I wouldn't be holding my breath expecting him to come back, or for him to find himself in any sort of situation where he becomes fantasy relevant, even for 20-team leagues. Even 30-team leagues, it's a real stretch for this point at CJ Watson. He's 32. He's done. If he's not in the NBA next year, I wouldn't be surprised. If he does remain in Orlando, which is a possibility, yeah, he sits in there as the third string point guard, and on most nights shouldn't play. And I think that's where we're at. Speaking of most nights shouldn't play, or maybe not playing, Mario Hazonia, the 5th pick in the 2015 draft, was disgusting. He played 65 games, 15 minutes a game, and averaged 5 points. 0.7 threes a game, an assist a game, 0.4 steals, shot 35% from the field, 29.9 from three, 80% from the line, for a true shooting of a disgusting 45%. So what went wrong for Hazonia? He saw regressions in numerous categories from his rookie season. He scored less points, he scored less threes. This is on a per 36 basis. He had less assists. He shot 8% worse from the field, 11% worse from the line, 5% worse from three. He saw his true shooting tumble from 54 to 44. That is a ridiculous drop for a guy in his second season. He looked lost for the majority of the time. Now, Vogel had some curious comments on Hazonia this season, and in the whole Aaron Gordon power forward thing, Vogel went out and said, you know what, maybe Mario Hazonia's best position is a power forward, just another guy they were trying to put in there ahead of Aaron Gordon. One more criticism I had of Vogel, just confusing stuff. Hazonia thinks of himself as a point guard. His assist numbers and playmaking doesn't necessarily belie that, but it's not horrible. And now Vogel wants to play him as a power forward. And to be honest, he actually did not bad in terms of his rebounding at power forward and played not terribly in that position. But when he was given opportunity, say like the second last game of the year against Chicago when they got smashed by 50 points, he played 32 minutes, he scored 7 points, didn't have a single rebound, he had 2 steals and hit 2 threes and shot 22%. He just never really had any sort of excitement for him going this season. And while he is still only young, and it is only going to be his third season in the year, he's 21 years of age, you're getting close to going, you know what, this guy, not only is he a bust at pick 5, which we can say he safely is at this point, but you wonder, like, does he actually get his rookie option picked up for his 4th season? I would do it. I would pick it up. But, where does the future sit for Hazonia? Ross is ahead of him. Obviously, Fournier is ahead of him. Do they bring in Monk, Tatum, Isaac? They're all going to be ahead of him most likely. Where does he sit? The other thing that's good about Hazonia, or cautionary about Hazonia, is that when people tell you, this team, the Kings, or whoever it is, whoever the Kings draft at pick 5 or at pick 6, or the Suns at pick 4, they're bringing in Josh Jackson now, TJ Warren's finished. These picks don't work out. Chris Dunn's coming to Minnesota. Rubio's finished. Chris Dunn, 5th pick. Terrible. These players in the draft, there is always multiple top 10 picks who turn out bad, who turn out real bad. So that's why, again, I always rail against the thought process of we've drafted this guy, let's trade the guy that's in his position now. And maybe you do if you get a great haul back, but just trading them because you drafted someone who might end up shithouse, whether that is Fultz, who knows, Ball, Smith, Fox, Ntilikina, Tatum, Jackson, whoever it is, someone's going to be bad. Someone is going to be bad. There is never a top 10 where every pick is like, you know what, this guy was really good. And Hazonia is another one of those players where picked at number 5. Yeah, all right, cool. Let's move forward. He's going to take on this starting role here. You have Peyton, Oladipo, Hazonia. There's our 1, 2, 3. But it didn't happen. Fournier stepped up. Hazonia was terrible. If I'm in a dynasty league and I'm looking at Hazonia, and I did this myself, I acquired him for nothing. Someone just was doing a trade with me. I can't remember who it was, like Kevin Love and someone else. And I just said, hey, do you want to throw in Hazonia? They went, yeah, cool. And they just threw him in because they were going to cut him anyway. So I just said, cool, I'll have him. And I'll just sit on him and I'll see what happens. I mentioned the other day, Oliver Maroney had a good tweet about the rookie seasons of players who are terrible and who are now good. Paul George, Jimmy Butler, Steve Nash, all Dirk Nowitzki, these sort of guys, Kawhi Leonard, who were bad, Kobe Bryant, as rookies. Now, Hazonia has been bad for 2 years, but third year is when players do take a big step forward. You know who was bad for their first 2 years? Otto Porter, and now he's probably going to be a max player. I'm not saying that he's great, but he was bad for his first 2 years. Now he's just played his 4th year where he was an elite 3-point shooter and a key part of a Wizards team that probably had did have a real chance of being a conference finalist in his 4th year, but took until his 3rd year to really step forward. So that could happen with Hazonia, but my confidence level in it is really low. And I just don't, so we haven't even seen real flashes from him. We saw a couple of games. There was a game on the 24th of March where he had 6 assists in 27 minutes. That's some playmaking that he's flashing there. I'm okay with it. That's good to see. He had a game against Charlotte on the 22nd of March where he had 7 boards and 8 points in 23 minutes. A little bit of rebounding prowess, but his inability to shoot is a real concern. So he is just a guy that I look at as a dynasty flyer type of a player in a deep league and hope something comes out. But at the moment, it's not looking great for Mario Hazonia. The Magic were 11.4 points worse off with him on the court versus him on the bench, which is obviously horrendous, and he couldn't crack inside the top 300 for the year. They had a couple of guys that barely played on this roster. I'm not going to talk too much about Marcus George Hunt. He played 5 games at 10 minutes a pop, and Patricio Garino, who played 5 games at 9 minutes a pop. I don't see anything from them that got me excited. In fact, Garino played those 45 minutes and didn't score at all, which is not ideal. He only took 1.5 shots a game, but still did not hit a single shot in his Magic tenure. The next guy we'll talk about is a restricted free agent. That's Damian Rudej. He played 7 minutes a game in 45 minutes, probably 7 minutes in 45 games, probably 42 games too many for Rudej. He shouldn't be in the NBA. He came in as a shooter because Vogel loved him from Indiana. He shot 31% from 3 with a true shooting of 47%. Shouldn't be in the NBA, probably won't be in the NBA. And then Steve Zimmerman is their center they drafted in the second round. He played 19 games at 6 minutes a pop, 1.8 rebounds, 1.2 points, 0.3 blocks, which in 6 minutes is actually not a bad return, and shot horribly at 33%. There's a little bit of hope for Zimmerman. Very, very limited, but a little bit to become maybe a guy that has an impact in 20-team leagues in 4 years' time. That's really about where I see him. His on-off numbers weren't ideal. He was outside the top 400 player this year. But I could see him becoming a poor man's Spencer Hawes. Really poor man's Spencer Hawes that can shoot a little bit, do some offensive stuff, and really struggle defensively, but can block some shots, which works for fantasy. And he'd need to find himself in a really positive environment in terms of playing time for it to work out. But yeah, in 30-teamers, 20, 24 teamers, 20 teamers, something like that. Maybe if you're willing to invest for a couple of years, he could move forward and become a backup center ahead of Bismack Biyombo and provide some offense off the bench for a team in 18 minutes a game and score 10 points. Even think of a Justin Hamilton type in Brooklyn. These are not big names that we're talking about. That's the sort of player that he could potentially develop into an offensive shooting type of center rather than someone who does really much defensively. But a couple of positive signs from Zimmerman, but nothing too spectacular that makes me say, you know what, get on this guy and really ride at home. But I could see him having 1 or 2 seasons of being a backup center on one team and having marginal deep league fantasy relevance. Let's now answer your questions that came in about the Magic. Barry Baker, does Mario Hezonja get any better than what we've seen from him or lack thereof last season? What's his actual season? I think he gets better, as I just talked about, but yeah, I don't ever think he's living up to the 5th pick in the draft, and I think he's going to struggle to have any sort of impact as a top 150 player ever. Kevin Carlson asks a question that's very close to my heart. Is Lord Alfred Payton's hair the ugliest in the NBA? Kevin, you could not be more wrong if you tried. He has the greatest hair in the NBA. He is number 1 in the good hair ratings. He's clearly got the best haircut in the NBA, and I will fight anybody who disagrees with that. Number 1 haircut, Alfred Payton, done. Part of why I love him. Love the hair. He is the number one haircut player in the NBA. Kevin, you are on the wrong side of history there, mate. All right. I think we're done for the Magic. What we're going to do next week, I've sort of sketched out a schedule. We're going to have a couple of days next week where there are going to be multiple shows recorded because I want to make sure all 30 of these are done before the NBA draft. And I also want to have a couple of days where I do some draft shows, probably 2 or 3 draft shows we'll do before the draft. So next week we'll have a couple of days with multiple shows. Just give you extra stuff to listen to, and that'll probably start tomorrow. At this point, I am looking at having the Timberwolves and the Knicks show tomorrow. They will be separate shows, but I'll record them both tomorrow. They'll both come out into your podcast feed tomorrow, so you'll have some extra listening to do there, and then we'll probably have a couple of extra ones later on in the week, another double day show, and that should open up some time to slot in some draft shows before we actually head to the NBA draft, which is coming up on June 23rd, I believe. All right, everyone. We are done. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Frank Vogel.